Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Coming up on the show, we're going to talk about the latest with the Arkansas transgender bill. That's the bill we talked about yesterday that the governor of Arkansas, the Republican, vetoed, betraying all common sense. We'll talk about the latest with that. Also, the president is signing, like right now, an executive order against guns. So we'll talk about what that is exactly about coming up as well. But first, I want to talk about this. Have you ever heard of the term hyphenated Americans? A hyphenated American, have you heard that? You see it all the time. Asian American, African American, whatever, you do with that. Irish American, right? And there's a hyphen between those two words. And I want to argue here that that hyphen is a big problem and we need to knock it off. Check this out from the Smithsonian Institute, right? We know the Smithsonian, right? It's like the government's like main big museum and research facility, right? This is the Smithsonian. This is the most authoritative source there is, right? Do you remember a couple months ago, they put up a picture, and it was entitled Aspects of White Supremacy Culture. And there was so much outrage about it, they ultimately took it down. Well, here's what they've replaced it with. And the reason I want to share this again, this is the most authoritative compilation of the racist, Marxist, postmodern thinking that we have today around race. This is what your kids are learning at school. Now, yes, there's school districts that have, a little bit here and there, and you have woke diversity seminar leaders that have a little bit here and there. But this from the Smithsonian, this is the official compilation of all of it. And it's as authoritative as you get. It's on the Smithsonian website. So I want to go through a little bit of this here and just remember, this is what your kids are learning at school. This is what they're learning in pop culture, and we need to actively reject it. And I'll tell you how we can do that coming up next. But let's just run through this quick. So it's called Talking About Race. Whiteness. That's the title of this section. Whiteness. Whiteness refers to the way that white people, their customs, culture, and beliefs operate as the standard by which all other groups are compared. America's history have created a culture where non-white persons are seen as inferior or abnormal. This white dominant culture also operates as a social mechanism that grants advantages to white people since they can navigate society both by feeling normal and being viewed as normal. People of color must always consider their racial identity, whatever the situation, due to the systemic and interpersonal racism that still exists. Okay, so that's the intro. Then they quote Toni Morrison, the author, writer Toni Morrison. And the quote they have is, in this country, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate. Everybody else has to hyphenate. No, that doesn't need to be true. It may be true today, but it doesn't need to be true. American doesn't need to be white. American just can mean American. But then we had to come up with all these other, then we had to come up with all African American, all these, right? This is really interesting. For a while in the past, there were people in America who would try to other people who were coming in, right? So there'd be people in America, and then there'd be immigrants coming in, and they'd be like, oh, those are Italian Americans. Those are Irish Americans. They're different, they're other. Let's hyphenate them, right? But now it's flipped. Now it's people who are here or coming here, and they want to hyphenate themselves, right? There are people now who are trying to other themselves by hyphenating their identity. This is a bad idea now. It's been a bad idea for 100 years. I want to share this quote here. This is from President Teddy Roosevelt, 1915, talking about this exact same thing. Again, 1915, 106 years ago. He says, there is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism. When I refer to hyphenated Americans, I do not refer to naturalized Americans. Some of the very best Americans I've ever known were naturalized Americans, Americans born abroad. But a hyphenated American is not an American at all. The one absolutely certain way of bringing this nation to ruin, of preventing all possibility of its continuing to be a nation at all, would be to permit it to become a tangle of squabbling nationalities. An intricate knot of German American, Irish American, English American, French American, Scandinavian American, or Italian American, each preserving its separate nationality. Today I would put the word identity in there, same thing. Each at heart feeling more sympathy with Europeans of that nationality than with the other citizens of the American Republic. There's no such thing as a hyphenated American who's a good American. The only man who's a good American is the man who is the American and nothing else. It's Teddy Roosevelt, 1915. Let me give you one more. Woodrow Wilson, not too long after. He said, any man who carries a hyphen about him carries a dagger that he's ready to plunge into the vitals of this republic whenever he gets ready. I love that. So the hyphen, literally the hyphen between blank American, that hyphen, it's actually a dagger that he's ready to stab America in the back with. If I can catch any man with a hyphen in this great contest, I will know that I have got an enemy of the republic. There are no conservatives, I don't know a single conservative who wants anyone to hyphenate. That's super important. I don't know of any conservatives who want other people to hyphenate. We are just looking for American. That's all we want. That's all we want everyone to be. We just want everyone to be American. And then we define what that means and the unity of principles, et cetera, et cetera. But we just want people to be American, not blank America. We don't want any more hyphens. Again, maybe back in the day, a long, long time ago, there were people who want to hyphenate everyone. But that's not the conservative position today. It hasn't been for a long time. And just one other side point to all this, all these race baiters who are out there at the Smithsonian, for instance, they're convincing white people to look at themselves as white, right? They're telling white Americans, you're white, you gotta think about white, you're white race, all that. And pretty soon, a lot of people are gonna feel guilt and shame about that. But a lot of other people are gonna go, yeah, you know what? I am white. Yeah, white people are awesome. Yeah, white pride. Yeah, white power. It's like, oh, Smithsonian, you did that. You did that. I don't look at myself as white. I'm an American. Oh, no, you're not. You're white. Pretty soon, a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, I am white. And that's not what we want. It's what the Smithsonian wants. It's what all these race baiters want, no doubt about it. So they go on, they talk about white privilege, they play some Robin DiAngelo video, they talk about white supremacy. Let me do this quick. The white supremacy is the belief of white superiority. It's been a part of the United States since its inception. The white European imperialists who settled here believed they were inherently superior to non-white groups. That's not even true. Once we get around to Columbus Day again, we'll do a whole segment on Columbus and read through his diaries and how he viewed the natives here. It's not how this is characterizing it. Direct and violent forms of racism that promote white supremacy have been on the rise in the recent years. These acts are more directly linked to white nationalism. That's not true. I don't know what they're talking about. We could go on. You can check out the website if you want. It's the Smithsonian website. But I want to end here. Are you familiar with Nicole Hannah-Jones? You've seen her before. Nicole Hannah-Jones, she's the person who is spearheading all of the New York Times 1619 Project. She's the leader behind all that. 1619 Project, her argument is that America was not founded in 1776, but 1619, when the first slave was brought to America. So racism was a part of America's identity and core from the very, very beginning, and is rooted in everything we do and everything that exists today. That's the premise of the 1619 Project that your kids are taught in school. It started out as a magazine in the New York Times, like a feature, and then now it's a curriculum at your kid's school. Okay. So Nicole Hannah-Jones, sorry. She's the one who made all this woke 1619 Project stuff mainstream. Now, she was paid to speak at a virtual event at the University of Oregon, a virtual talk. She didn't have to travel. How much do you think that gig pays? Right, so she speaks for an hour at the University of Oregon. How much do you think she gets paid? $25,000. Pays pretty good. You wonder why a lot of people keep this act up. It pays. But check this out about her dad. I did not know this about her dad. By the way, Nicole Hannah-Jones hates this country, should be noted. She thinks we're racist at our core. Everything we do, everything we are, everything we've ever been, everything we ever will be. She thinks it's a racist, horrible, evil place. Her dad disagreed. Her dad embraced the American flag. Not the Black American, African American, this American, that American, just the American flag. And she said that this embarrassed her when she was a child. His embrace of patriotism, his embrace of the American flag in this country embarrassed her. That's what she said. She said, I was deeply embarrassed by this outward show of patriotism from my father. I understood that Black Americans were second-class citizens. This was a man, her father, who was born on a cotton plantation in apartheid Mississippi. One of the smartest men that I knew, but who had never had any real opportunities in the country. And yet, here he was, exhibiting patriotism. He was a veteran. So hold on. You're telling me this Black man, born on a cotton plantation in Mississippi, even he loved America? He fought for this country. He loved this country. He had presumably nothing, right? It seems like he didn't live a prosperous life, at least by how we define prosperous today. Big house, lots of stuff, et cetera, et cetera. You would think he would have every reason to not love this country. But he rejected all of that and embraced the flag, the American flag. His daughter, on the other hand, has no reason to hate this country. She went to Notre Dame, works for the New York Times, and makes $25,000 for an hour-long speech. But she's the one who hates America? How does that make any sense? It's because of the hyphen. Because of the hyphen. You start hyphenating, we lose our unity. Her dad was not a hyphenated American. So why does she want to be? The true story is, Nicole Hannah-Jones is objectively one of the most prosperous people to have ever walked the face of the planet. She earned more in that hour speech, and she gives these all the time. She earned more in that hour speech than most people in the world earn in years, if not lifetime. Even her father could unite around these American principles that we love. Just like the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. could, just like Frederick Douglass, born a slave, could. Just like so many other people who are grateful for America. But that generation's kids who have lived as privileged of a life as could possibly be lived can't seem to be grateful, can't seem to unite, and instead worship the hyphen and make it their life's mission to divide. Coming up next, talk about the latest with this transgender bill in Arkansas and the governor's betrayal. What business interests are involved here? Talking about that next. True story. Mike Slater, Spread the Word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I want to talk about the latest with the Arkansas transgender kids bill. So, Arkansas legislature passed a bill that says you can't give puberty blockers to minors, to kids, or perform sex change operations on children. And the Arkansas governor vetoed it. He's a Republican, and he vetoed it. So we talked all about that yesterday. Please download our app on the App Store for your phone. Just search for The First. It'll pop right up, and you can watch all of our previous shows, and they're on YouTube as well. So you can hear our full rundown of how insane all that is. But I just want to answer a common criticism that I get on the radio, and I'm sure I get here. Slater, why do you spend so much time on transgender issues? Who cares? It doesn't matter. I obviously disagree. Transgenderism is the ultimate progressive issue. Because if they can convince you and humiliate you into saying or even being silent when other people say that gender doesn't exist, if they can get you to do that, then nothing exists. And if they can humiliate you to that point, then there's nothing you can do about anything. The point of propaganda is not to inform you or convince you of something. The point of propaganda is to humiliate you. It's super important to understand. Propaganda is not there to inform you or misinform you even, or to convince you of something or not convince you. Propaganda is there to humiliate you. So the more wild and crazy and outlandish the claim is of the propaganda, the better. Because if they can get you to go along with it, then you've been humiliated. That's the goal. That's the reason they picked this fight. Okay, that's really important too. They picked it. The left picked this. Do you remember? I distinctly remember 2016, the North Carolina bathroom bill. Do you remember that? About who can go into what bathroom in North Carolina? That came out of nowhere. Like, do you remember ever thinking for a second about transgender bathrooms? But that's what started this whole thing. Now, why did that start? Well, the gay rights movement was over. Every state now allowed gay marriage, and the people who made a career out of LGBT activism, they built up these huge organizations and activist groups and all that. And they looked around and they're like, well, I guess we're done with that. Now what do we do? Like, they couldn't just go home and find a real job. They couldn't pack up and close up, and right? Like, these groups are never like, well, I guess we're done. So they looked around and they said, what else do we do? Well, let's pick up the fight on behalf of the T's. They picked this fight. And they picked it for a reason. They redefined marriage. That's a pretty big ask. But they were able to pull that off. But that's not enough. They also now have to redefine gender. And once they've done that, once they've humiliated you enough to go along with that, there's nothing left. That's why this is a hill that I will die on. This is a line in the sand. If you stand by and you agree that gender doesn't exist, then you've been morally neutered. You have zero credibility left to stand up for anything. There's nothing you can ever take a stand on from this point forward. I mean that. Who's the person who's like, oh, sure, fine, maybe you can switch genders and 4-year-olds can decide what gender they are and they can switch it, blah, blah. But this other issue over here, that's a bridge too far. No. This is the furthest bridge. You give it up, you got nothing left. I'll give you an example from yesterday. Kristen Gillibrand. Kristen Gillibrand is the senator from New York. And she wrote this tweet about the $3 trillion infrastructure bill that we've talked a lot about. She said, paid leave is infrastructure. Childcare is infrastructure. Caregiving is infrastructure. Now, we've talked a lot about how only 5% of this bill is in fact infrastructure. Well, what's the other 95%? Well, stuff like this, and they call it infrastructure. And you say, but that's not infrastructure. And here's Kristen Gillibrand saying, oh, paid leave is infrastructure. Now, that's absurd. But can you complain? You don't think there's such thing as gender. You think gender's on a spectrum. You think little boys and little girls can just switch their gender. You don't even have the courage to define man and woman. You think you have the credibility left to define infrastructure? Are you with me? Now, I'm not picking on you because I know you're with me on this, but I'm talking to the person who refuses to take a stand on this, who is scared to take a stand on this. Does that make sense? Kristen Gillibrand can make this claim about infrastructure and get away with it because there's people who can't even define boy or girl. You with me? Boy and girl, that's the easiest thing possible to define. But if that's up in the air, what, are you going to take a hard stand on infrastructure? No, infrastructure is our bridges and roads. Oh, really? You can't even tell me what a boy or a girl is. That's why it matters. That's why they're picking it. That's not me saying why it matters. That's why they picked this fight. Sophia Bush, actress, she was on One Tree Hill. She wrote this long Instagram post, and she said, trans kids are under attack across the country. Arkansas just banned them from accessing health care. This is tantamount to murder. Kids will tell us who they are. It's our job to support them, not demonize or harm them. I'm not demonizing these kids, right? We're trying to protect them, that's the point. I'm demonizing the quack doctors, and I'm being critical of the parents who push this on their kids. But the point here is they call sex change operations and puberty blockers health care. And if you disagree, it's murder. It's tantamount to murder. Now, to the person who won't engage in this conversation, can you stand up to that? No, you can't, because you can't even define what a boy is, or you refuse to, because you want to be seen as nice. Oh, or you, what's the big deal? Who cares? No, that's why this issue matters. Because if you let this one go, they call you a murderer. Remember the story we talked about a couple weeks ago? I think it was like 2 weeks ago. There's a dad in Canada, Alberta, divorced or going through a divorce. His daughter was 11 when she said she first wanted to be a boy or thought she was a boy. The mom supports it. The doctor, the school did this. The school went behind the parents' back and allowed the girl to be called by her preferred boy name. This is a part of their tolerant sex ed program. It's called SOGI 123 in Canada, sexual orientation, gender identity, SOGI 123. The school forwarded this girl to this doctor, Dr. Wong, who got in trouble a couple years back for telling parents that if they want attention from the Canadian government, if they want resources and money, then they need to, quote, pull a stunt, suicide every time they'll give you what you need, okay? So just say your kid is committed suicide or tried to commit suicide, attempted suicide, and the government will trip all over themselves to give you what you need. So anyway, the court told the dad that you are not allowed to talk to the media and you can't call your daughter a she. You just have to stand by and wait while your ex-wife pumps your daughter full of puberty blockers and hormones. So the court said you can't talk about it, and he did. And he was thrown in jail. He's been in jail for like 3 weeks. His trial's next week. He's been in jail. I know like our brains can't like compute that. I'm watching, a little side note, I'm watching all these pastors up in Canada get arrested for having church. And it's like, I see the story, I see them getting arrested, but like my brain can't compute that. It's like, what are you talking about? And it's the same thing here. What do you mean he's in jail? Oh, Slater, he's not in jail. He's in jail. Ah, you're making that up. He's in jail right now. He's in jail. He's accused of committing family violence. That's what the court called it. Family violence, because he refuses to call his daughter a he. Do you see how Orwellian this is? But that's what happens when you don't take a stand. If you don't take a stand against this, what can you take a stand against? Last point about how corporations are influencing policy here. So the governor of Arkansas went on Tucker Carlson's show the other day and just looked like a total fool. And what seemed like out of nowhere, Tucker asked him this question.
Have you spoken to any of the biggest employers, the big companies in Arkansas about this? Have you taken any calls from Tyson's, from Dillard, from Walmart? Has anyone from those companies called you about this bill?
No, but Tucker, you're saying, first of all,
you haven't spoken
there's no
to
studies,
one
and then you cite a
corporate
study.
interest. Have you, and I just want to be clear on this, have you spoken to any corporate interest in the state of Arkansas about this bill?
Tucker, I answered that. I answered that question, and I said, no, I have not.
No,
you have another question.
Okay. I'm skeptical because
Tucker?
we've certainly seen across the, let me just say, Governor, with respect, I'm skeptical that not a single corporation in the state of Arkansas has weighed in with you one way or the other on this bill. I'm skeptical.
You asked me if I had talked to them. I said I hadn't.
It's weird, right? His response of, no, do you have another question? That seems oddly defensive. We've seen, good for Tucker for asking and getting, and keep asking, get him on the record. We've seen more and more businesses, of course, go woke and really insert themselves into debates and assert their power and influence, which is a weird thing. It used to be the left who was against corporate power. But now that corporations have gone woke, the last domino to fall in the march through the institutions, now the left, of course, loves corporate power and influence and pressures corporations to jump into these debates that they have no business getting involved in. So Arkansas, the biggest employer in Arkansas, obviously, is Walmart, by far. I don't think there's a single family in any state that's more influential in the state than the Walton family is in Arkansas. I don't even have a comparison. I'm in California. There's no comparison to anything like the Waltons in Arkansas. Sure enough, this is a statement from the Walton family the day that he vetoed the bill. We are alarmed by the string of policy targeting LGBTQ people in Arkansas. No, not people, necessarily kids. Let's be specific, kids. The trend is harmful, sends the wrong message to those who are willing to invest in and visit our state. We support Governor Asa Hutchinson's recent veto of discriminatory policy and implore government, business, and community leaders to consider the impact of existing and future policy that limits basic freedoms, puberty blockers, and does not promote inclusiveness in our communities and economy. Our nation was built on inalienable rights and strengthened by individual differences. Arkansas has been called the land of opportunity because it's a place where anyone can think big and achieve the extraordinary. Any policy that limits individual opportunity also limits our state's potential. Again, we're talking about puberty blockers for kids and transgender sex surgery on kids. And here we are, Walmart is talking about limiting individual opportunity and freedom, land of opportunity, and alienable rights. Are you kidding me? Has everyone lost their minds? But that's these corporations just getting behind all these policies. With the Georgia bill we saw it the last few weeks, Coca-Cola, United, Delta, Major League Baseball, of course. Every cultural force is against you. Every cultural force is against you. It's all the more reason why you need to take a stand on this issue and every other one as well. But this is the biggest. You need to take a stand against every single one because everyone is working against you. It'd be nice if we had a Republican in power who would defend the truth for you alongside you. Mike Slater, true story. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, we got to talk about big tech. They're even more out of control. By the way, I'm not on it anymore. MikeSlater.locals.com. That's my exodus from it. Please join us over there. We have a whole new community, and it's way better. It's Dave Rubin's platform, MikeSlater.locals.com. Just what they've done today, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, had a roundtable discussion about COVID, and YouTube took it down. Won't even allow a conversation with the governor of Florida regarding COVID. This is just a couple days after, and very few people talked about this, Lara Trump interviewed Donald Trump. And Instagram and Facebook not only took down that interview, but they said content posted on Facebook and Instagram in the voice of Donald Trump is not currently allowed. So they've banned every future interview ever with Donald Trump. Or, because they set the algorithm for that. So I bet if we played a clip of Donald Trump here, I bet they won't even allow us to post this video up on YouTube. Totally out of control. Now, good news, I think, and I don't even really understand this. This is why we had our next guest on. Clarence Thomas just issued this. I don't know anything. I don't know if this is a statement or a decision. I don't know what this is. But he said today's digital platforms provide avenues for historically unprecedented amounts of speech, including speech by government actors. Also unprecedented, however, is the concentrated control of so much speech in the hands of a few private parties. We will soon have no choice but to address how our legal doctrines apply to highly concentrated, privately owned information infrastructure, such as digital platforms. This has to do with Section 230. So to help us understand what this is all about, Alam Bakari is here from Breitbart. Alam, how are you, brother?
Hi, Mike. Good to be on.
Really good to talk to you. So let's start with Section 230 and what Clarence Thomas said right there. What is Section 230?
So Section 230 is the current legal framework that tech companies rely on. It's the law that gives them wide censoring it, so they're legally protected from both. You can't take them to court for hosting content that violates the law in some way, like defamation, and you can't take them to court for censoring content, for taking it down. And that's the legal framework that we currently operate under. Now, what Clarence Thomas is saying is that, given the concentration of power in Silicon Valley, that might need to change. and Congress should consider designating these companies as common carriers or as places of public accommodation, both of which are types of companies that are much more restricted in whether or not they can deny service to their customers. And he's saying that the Supreme Court will soon have to rule on it.
Okay, I got a lot of questions. Let me make sure I fully understand this. So, who wrote Section 230? What is it? Was it a bill that was passed to apply specifically to social media companies, or is it something that already existed?
So yeah, this was a bill that was passed in the 1990s, in the very early days of the internet, by Congress. And the idea was to both allow technology companies to develop filtering mechanisms for things like obscenity, while also protecting them from lawsuits related to the kind of content they host, to allow them to host like the millions and millions of posts from users without being legally liable for it. It kind of allows, and that element of Section 230 really allows social media to exist as a viable type of business, because if Facebook or Twitter were liable for the posts of their users, the business model would not make sense, because there'd be all sorts of defamation lawsuits that'd be subject to.
Yeah.
So that part of the law is good. The second part of the law, though, which gives them immunity from taking down user content, many people think is the problematic part of the law.
Okay, help me understand that one a little more. I'm not quite there. You're doing a perfect job explaining it, but talk down to me a little more. So explain again what that second part of the law does.
The second part of the law says these companies have immunity for removing content that they consider to be obscene or harassing or otherwise objectionable. So you can't if they take down your content and say, well, I find this content objectionable, you can't take them to court over that. They'll face no penalties. And that's the part of the law that essentially gives them immunity to censorship.
Interesting. Okay, I get it. So I'm trying to. It sounds like a good thing when the way you just described it. Because I'd want them to have the ability to take down, let's just use the extreme example, child pornography, and not be held liable for abridging someone's freedom of speech.
Well, that's illegal content. So the law already does not protect illegal content. Yes. It's just things that are legal, but might be considered objectionable, like obscene content. And in my opinion, I think they should just give users the tool to filter content that might be objectionable. So this is what Google does. They have a safe search button, and you turn the safe search button, and all your results are family friendly. That's fine.
Yes.
The problem is they've expanded this notion of objectionable material to encompass things like so-called misinformation and hate speech and all these vague, politically charged categories. And then they impose their filters on users. They don't give users a choice to turn them off. And they also, of course, ban users.
Like the president of the United States. Okay. What's like the libertarian freedom of speech argument against getting rid of Section 230? Like, oh, it's a private company, Twitter can do whatever they want.
Well, I think there are solid libertarian and non-libertarian arguments for keeping some part of Section 230. Like I said, the part of the law that says, well, these platforms aren't going to be liable for defamatory content, that's fine. That allows the internet to exist as in its current form. There are some exceptions. I'd say Wikipedia, for example, should be liable for defamation because it's basically an encyclopedia. But, social media companies like Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, you can see why they'd need that kind of protection. The problem lies in whether they're allowed to deny service to people. And this is what Clarence Thomas is getting at. These companies have so much power over speech in America, the ability to censor the president of the United States even, that they should be subject to tighter restrictions over what kind of, whether or not they're allowed to deny service to users.
What about, let's say I started my own social media company, right? And I don't want, a certain type of person on it. Or certain opinions to be shared. I don't know. I wouldn't really want the government coming in telling me, no, you have to allow these opinions to be shared. So I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here. How do you?
Of course. Well, yeah, no one would want that. But the problem is when you have such a concentration of power, then you have a situation where you get the argument that you should be a common carrier, because I think Clarence Thomas makes the argument. Well, yes, people can still choose to swim across a river instead of using the bridge if the bridge bans you. But that's still a big problem. It still creates kind of two-tiered society where, where you have a class of second-class citizens who are excluded from the essential services.
Was that his line he used?
Yeah, he did use that metaphor.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so what is a common carrier? What protections or how is that different of being a common?
So, like public utilities, for example, are common carriers. The conditions under which, say, the gas company or the electricity company or I think airlines as well are subject to these kind of regulations. The conditions under which they're allowed to deny services to customers are tightly regulated by the government. And for a while, under net neutrality, internet service providers were subject to common carrier restrictions. This was Title II of the net neutrality reforms under Obama, which was kind of bizarre because the ISPs had never actually censored people. They never really denied service in the same manner that social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter have. But the bottom line is, if you're a common carrier, you can't simply ban people or deny service for any reason or no reason, which is what social media platforms can currently do.
Mr. Bakari, I'm so excited you're here because I'm in like a state of flux here as I'm first really learning about this and as you're explaining it. Because my first thought is when you give more control to the government, even if you think it's going to be to allow more freedom, ultimately it just gives them more power to abridge and take away more of your freedom down the road. Do you think that doesn't apply here?
Well, there comes a point where, I think corporations can become a threat to freedom too, and that's happened before, and, a threat to, the integrity of democracy. I think that happened back in the late 19th century with the rise of the oil cartels, and it's happening again now. And when you look at Europe, they have, all these hate speech laws that they impose on social media companies. But many European governments spoke out against the censorship of President Donald Trump because, in their view, well, Silicon Valley companies should not be more powerful than national governments. And who would you rather be subject to? Like a Silicon Valley company, which is not subject to any sort of democratic controls or checks and balances, or a government which at least has some level of democratic accountability, because with the European hate speech laws are bad, certainly. But first of all, there's a First Amendment in America, so that wouldn't happen here. And second of all, Silicon Valley changes the definition of hate speech and expands it overnight and implies arbitrarily. They're subject to no standards whatsoever. So I would argue that it's better to have the government controlling your speech, especially when you have a First Amendment restraining it, than compared to private companies, which are not currently subject to First Amendment restrictions.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Let me, what's the Supreme Court's role in this? Like, and how would they tackle it? Like, what case would have to come up that they would, I don't even like strike part of Section 230 down?
Right. So this is the interesting thing. So Clarence Thomas's statement is not actually a ruling on a case that they're going to take up. It's actually an opinion on a case they dismissed about the president's Twitter feed and whether citizens should have access to it. So back under Trump, some people sued the president, saying, well, the president should not be allowed to block citizens from his feed because the feed should be considered it's access to a public official. Clarence Thomas made the point, well, Twitter has the ability to deny citizens access to that, not Trump, as shown by their actions. But in the course of this opinion rejecting the case, Clarence Thomas says, well, we'll soon have to make a ruling on, whether our legal doctrines on speech apply to these platforms. And he's sort of he also encourages Congress to, actually get their act together and tackle this problem, which they haven't done so far, because he's saying, if Congress doesn't do it, then we'll have to do it.
Wow, very good. All right, Alun Bakari, super grateful for you. That was perfect. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you, Mike. Great to be on.
Alun Bakari, Breitbart.com. Very good. Okay, I'm still, however, very wary of giving government more power ever, even if it seems like at first we're giving them more power for our benefit. It's our benefit for now. Will it be later? I think there's other ways to get around big tech. For instance, MikeSlater.locals.com. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Today, the president signed an executive order about guns, against guns, preventing you just chipping away, making it harder for you and law-abiding people to own guns. But he did it through executive order, which is interesting. Here is a moment from the Democratic primary debates.
In recent days, former Vice President Biden has said about executive orders, some really talented people are seeking the nomination. They said, I'm going to issue an executive order. Biden saying there's no constitutional authority to issue that executive order when they say I'm going to eliminate assault weapons, saying you can't do it by executive order any more than Trump can do things when he says he can do it by executive order. Does the Vice President have a point there?
Some things you can, many things you can't.
Let's let the Senator answer.
Well, I mean, I would just say, hey, Joe, instead of saying no, we can't, let's say yes, we can.
Let's be constitutional. We got a constitution.
And yes,
Oh, that is excruciating. Jeff Charles is here, contributor at RedState and LibertyNation.com. Jeff, sorry to intro you with that. That's not kind. Sorry about that. Oh man.
That's all right.
So what is this? What does this executive order say, Jeff?
Yeah. So what I know so far, and I haven't had a chance to dig all the way into it yet, but I know that it's going to ban ghost guns, things like that. I'm not sure if it actually addresses assault weapons, because again, I'm not sure that he even can do that. But what I'm kind of getting from this is that it almost feels like more of a feel-good measure for his base, because the legislation that he wants to get through Congress, it doesn't look like that's going to happen, especially in the Senate. So I think he's wanting to put on an appearance that he's actually doing something about the mass shootings that we saw over the past few weeks. So doesn't seem to be that much here, but again, it could also be leading into a more overall agenda as well. But with an executive order, we both know that can be rescinded when there's a Republican president in office again. So it's not going to fulfill the promise that he made to the gun control base.
Yeah, I think that's all right. What is a ghost gun?
Yeah, so a ghost gun is one that you can make on your own, whether it's through 3D printing or what have you. It has no serial number, so it can't really be tracked that way. So some people have been, some on the left have been concerned about people making guns rather than having to go through all the background checks and all that stuff. And one of the provisions of the order is that if you do have a ghost gun and you want to sell it to somebody, you have to do a background check. So that's really what they're trying to tamp down on. I'm not sure how common these guns are in comparison to people just going and buying regular firearms. But again, that's why I say that this, even if it does succeed and people aren't able to make ghost guns, this isn't going to really do what they want it to do.
No, I wonder how many mass murderers or any just shootings have taken place because of ghost guns. It seems more hobbyist than murderous. I would imagine. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I think it is more like a hobby type of thing. Like, I don't think people are making ghost guns so that they can go hunting or because they want to defend themselves. I think it's more of a hobby. If somebody wants a serious gun, they're going to go out and buy one.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting how all this changes once 3D printing becomes very, very good and everyone can just print their own gun. Like, what are we going to do then? But that's a couple years down the road. Talk to me about, I've read an article the other day about black ownership of guns or gun purchases from black people in America is just shooting through the roof. Have you read about this?
I have, and this has been going on for a while, but I mean, especially over 2020 with the coronavirus pandemic and with all the unrest that we saw over the summer, black gun ownership is going up, but it was actually going up before that. I think more black people are starting to realize that it's important to exercise your Second Amendment rights. And you also have organizations like Black Guns Matter with Maj Touré out there spreading the word and educating people about responsible gun use. I think that most black people in the past, they have supported more gun control, and they may still to a certain extent, but that doesn't mean that they don't themselves want to possess firearms.
Yeah, interesting. I remember Condoleezza Rice gave a talk once, and she talked about how growing up in Bull Connor and how her dad and all his friends, they had guns, and it was to protect themselves from the government in that case, but from gangs or whatever. People need to have that right, no?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and especially if you're a black person and you live in an area that's more dangerous, you're going to want to be able to have the means to protect yourself. And that's one of the reasons why I say that gun control is racist, because one of the ways that they prevent black people from getting guns is by putting them through all of these onerous restrictions, all of these fees that they have to pay just to have a license, depending on where you live, well, that's going to disproportionately impact the Black community. But if you live in an area where you might need to defend yourself, then you're kind of SOL at that point. So I think that what I predict is that in the years to come, you're going to see more Black people who want to exercise their Second Amendment rights, and they're not going to be so happy about these restrictions that they're putting on. They may be okay with some, but they're not going to be on board with the extreme agenda that we're seeing from Biden and others on the left.
Gun control is racist. I dig it. Jeff on the right, Jeff Charles from Red State. Jeff, appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
A buddy of mine, I asked a friend of mine, in the military, I said, how many guns should I have? And he said, you should have enough guns where it can properly be described as an arsenal. I asked another friend of mine, I said, how many guns do you have? I just asked him yesterday. He goes, like 5 or 6. You need so many guns, you can't even keep track of them all. That's how many guns you should own because it's America. Safely own and store properly, of course. True story. Mike Slater. Tomorrow, our special on what is life like in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. We know why people want to come here, but why do people want to leave those countries? That's what we're going to investigate tomorrow. Spread the word.